Chapter 9, Final Thoughts. Since I am writing this story at the present time, I will let you know what happened from then till now. First of all, the video store and Frank were absolved of any wrongdoing, and the video store continued to do good for 5 years after this incident. The video store moved to a smaller location in the same neighborhood. This downsizing helped this mom-and-pop store still make a profit. Frank was able to run the store by himself. He felt that he was the owner, not just a manager. The owner gave Frank complete control of everything. The business was slowing down because of cable and the internet. Frank used his compulsive behavior to come up with ideas to increase business. Frank decided to sell DVD players and give the customer 10 free rentals. This wasn't working, so Frank decided to change the advertisement from buying a DVD player for $25 and get 10 free rentals to buying 10 rentals for $25 and get a DVD player for free. This really did the trick. Business was booming again. Since DVDs were cheap, Frank bought a lot of copies of new releases. This brought all those customers who bought the DVD players into the store to use up the rentals. Since this store was in the neighborhood and the big store was closer to center of town, it was easier for the customers to get there. Frank was doing a good job competing with the big chain video stores. You know who they are. Frank kept reinventing this small store. Frank's big thing was to decorate the video store at Christmas, and he even put a live tree outside. Every year he had a different theme. One year he even had a lighted fireplace in the window. He achieved this by putting brick paper around the TV and showing a fireplace video on it. Frank has videotapes of every Christmas at this small store. In the winter, the video stores were busier than other times of the year, especially when it snowed. Since the large video chains had a big overhead, they were closing stores, but Frank was still doing good. But it finally happened. After 4 years at this location, this small store was going down, and Frank had to close it because of all the cable ads which said, "No more trips to the video store. You can stay home and pay to view whatever you wanted without leaving the comfort of your home." Frank didn't have to make any more trips to the video store either. Frank's dream job finally came to an end. Frank got jobs right away. He worked at the gas station, and he also worked at the ice cream store, plus all the odd jobs he had. Even though Frank got into trouble over 20 years ago, and even the embezzlement that Mr. Johnson did at the video store didn't stop us from living our lives together. Mr. Johnson accepted responsibility for the wrongdoing that he did at the video store in 1997 and took a plea bargain and was sentenced to 3 years probation in order to pay full restitution of $46,000. The videotape confession that Frank got did prove that Frank and the video store had nothing to do with Mr. Johnson's scheme. This confession was legally obtained because if Mr. Johnson didn't want to be recorded, all he had to do was turn off the VCR. Mr. Johnson proved this the next day when he showed Frank the 4-page Mac statement. He turned off the VCR. Frank also told me what he did next. Frank hooked up another VCR in the drop ceiling and wired it to the camera. This way, if one of the employees would turn off the VCR under the counter, Frank would still have a copy of what went on when he was off. The employees didn't realize that by having the store under surveillance, it was protecting them if there was a robbery. The owner of the video store liked the idea of having that second VCR hidden in the drop ceiling. Mr. Johnson's scheme caused the video store to stop taking Mac and credit cards for payment. The video store kept this policy in effect even after the video store was absolved of wrongdoing. Everybody knew about Frank's crime, but nobody knew about Mr. Johnson's embezzlement scheme against the video store. If Mr. Johnson would have come up with his scheme now, all he had to do was sit in front of a computer and transfer money from victims' accounts to his Mac Visa account without leaving the comfort of his home. Then I would have called him a cyber criminal instead of an electronic criminal. I was behind the scenes when all this criminal activity was going on. Frank worked on this investigation of Mr. Johnson while he was at the prison camp. He sent me these investigative reports as fast as he typed them. Frank told me to make copies and give these reports to the owner so that she can keep the merchant bank from closing the video store down. As fast as Frank sent me these reports, I would call the owner and she would pick them up at the house. She told me that she really appreciated my help. She used to bring me free movies to look at. She would bring the new releases as soon as they came out and pick up the ones from the previous week. This went on until Frank came home from the prison camp. I believe that if Frank wouldn't have exposed Mr. Johnson's scheme and got that confession on him, that the bank would have closed the video store down and it would have had a sheriff's sale to pay for what was embezzled by Mr. Johnson. I don't think if the video store would have hired an outside agency to investigate Mr. Johnson's scheme, they could have done a better job than Frank did. If I ever met Mr. Johnson today, I would like to tell him face to face, you messed with the wrong company, and instead of using Frank in the video store to get blamed for what you did, you got caught because of the investigation that they did on you. I didn't write the story right after it happened because I felt that it would be bad publicity for the video store, and it might have given future Mr. Johnson's ideas to try the same scheme that Mr. Johnson did. I didn't mention the names of the witnesses when writing the story because I really didn't know who did what in reference to Mr. Johnson's scheme. This information was furnished to the merchant bank to aid them in their part of the investigation. Now at the present time, Frank and I are retired and stay home enjoying each other's company, looking at movies and all those Christmas videos that Frank recorded every Christmas at the video store. I would like to close this story by saying, all's well that ends well.
I didn't even check.
196.
Grab that. Did you see the park lock for him? Grab that one right there. Right under the next line. So anyway, I like this place, and I'm going to spend some money.